Bible. That ain't what?
All right, so what we see in this video is two Hebrew Israelites approaching two older women and trying to use a verse that they commonly like to use, Revelation 1:14, to try to push their skin doctrine to say that Jesus is black. We know the reality is we don't know what color Jesus was when he walked the earth, but that does not stop Hebrew Israelites from trying to push their skin doctrine. But if you actually examine the text, you'll see that they run into a few huge problems here. So let's check it out. Revelation 1:14, and it reads, his head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow. So let's stop right there. What's being described here clearly is not in reference to the texture of Jesus' head, but it's in reference to the color of his head, which is why it says his head and his hairs were white like wool. So what you'll have a whole lot of Hebrew Israelites try to do here is say, well, who but black people have woolly hair? That's not what it's talking about. It's clearly describing here color. But we have another issue. If you look at the beginning of verse 14, it says his head and his hairs. So if we take the Hebrew Israelite interpretation that this is a literal description of what Jesus looks like, then we have Jesus here with a white head and white hairs. But let's keep it going. And his eyes were as a flame of fire. So not only do we have Jesus here with a white head, white hairs, and eyes like fire, we're going to have an odd-looking Jesus by the time we get to the next verse. So let's check that out. Verse 15, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they were burned in a furnace. So we're going to have, if we take their interpretation, because I know some people that work in that industry that knows what burnt brass looks like, or brass that is burned in a furnace looks like, and they say it's definitely not brown. But even if we take that interpretation, we have a Jesus here now with a white head, white hairs, flaming eyes, and brown feet. Oh, and it gets better. And his voice as the sound of many waters. So now Jesus's voice literally sounds like a waterfall at this point, or an ocean. Okay, let's keep reading. Verse 16, and he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword. So if everything here is literal, and this is what Jesus looked like, and they're taking this literal, hyperliteral interpretation, then not only should Jesus be carrying 7 stars, he should also have a sword coming from his mouth. This is what happens when you have a poor eisegetical reading of Scripture. Now, let's finish up here. And out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shining in his strength. Let's read that again. And his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength. This is literally saying that his face was shining like the sun. Now, let's read this back into the text. We have Jesus with a white head, white hair, eyes like fire, brown feet, voice like waters, a sword coming out of his mouth, and his face shining as bright as the sun at full strength. And they say Christians got problems. Y'all take care.